Welcome to another artist conversation in our series, Pathways for Dialogue, Past, Present, Future.
And thank you all for being here tonight. I'm really excited to be in conversation with Valerio and Marta Sanchez. To give you a little bit of context, the first 7 panels that we had in the Tribeca space were primarily focused on artists, their spheres of influence, current and upcoming projects. And since being able to expand the Tribeca showcase, we had the opportunity to expand the scope of these dialogues, looking now to others who are involved in the arts ecosystem and introducing different perspectives. So today, as I mentioned, we have Valerio and Marta, who are both they live and work in Philadelphia, and it may seem a little bit odd to be looking at the Philly art scene while we're here in New York, though I feel that there's such a robust arts ecosystem in Philadelphia that often gets glossed over in the national dialogue. And perhaps I'm partial because I live there, but I think it's really worthwhile exploring some of those elements that make it unique and worth paying attention to. So to introduce our esteemed guests, Valerio is now in the 13th year of his tenure, and he serves as the Patricia Van Berg Allison Director and CEO of the Woodmere Art Museum, which is dedicated to the artists of Philadelphia. Under Dr. Valerio's leadership, the Woodmere has become increasingly vital and a diverse presence in the cultural life of the region, elevating the visibility of Philadelphia's artists and the unique creative history of the city. Dr. Valerio attended Williams College, graduating cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa in 1985. And he earned his PhD in art history at Yale University in 1996 and his MBA at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania in 2004. Marta Sanchez was born and raised in San Antonio, Texas. She's a Chicana painter, and she has been inspired by the traditional Mexican folkloric art expressions and contemporary issues. Her works on paper are mostly linocuts and monotypes, which follow the social and cultural traditions of Mexican and Chicano or Chicana art. Her paintings are mainly on tin or industrial corrugated metal, and the materials, scale, and issues connect to present-day concerns. Marta earned an MFA in painting from the Tyler School of Art at Temple University, and a Bachelor of Fine Arts in painting from the University of Texas at Austin. She instructed at the Philadelphia Museum of Art for over 17 years and now teaches at St. Joseph University. She now serves as the Director of Programming at the Brandywine Workshop and Archives in Philadelphia, and she is the founder and grassroots organizer, she is the founder of the grassroots organization Cascarones por la Vida, which assists families affected by HIV or AIDS for over 30 years. So thank you both for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Starting to kind of establish a little bit of context, Bill, I know that you worked for the Queens Museum of Art, and Marta, you are from San Antonio, Texas originally, and I'm curious, what is it that drew you to Philadelphia?
Go ahead, Bill.
I moved to Philadelphia in 2002, and I grew up in New York, never thought I would live anywhere else, but September 11th happened, and I actually lived very close to where we're sitting right now. I was planning to go to business school and decided, I think I could use a break from New York, and so I came to Philadelphia to go to school. I went to Philadelphia from here to go to school and found it to be, a wonderful, vibrant, livable city. I mean, having grown up in New York, I love the energy level of New York. I miss New York in some ways, but I love living in Philadelphia. It's a green city. It's a vibrant city for the arts. I mean, if you love art, Philadelphia is a great place to live. If you love music, Philadelphia is a great place to live. And at the time, in 2002, my son was 6 or 7 years old, and raising a kid in Philadelphia is much easier, I think, than raising a kid in New York, especially an athletic kid. I mean, my son, would want to, play soccer for breakfast, tennis for lunch, baseball for dinner. I mean, like that kind of kid. And, in Philadelphia, you can do that. I mean, there's literally a soccer league in every neighborhood. And in New York, I mean, already, even with him being fairly young, it was a lot of work. Like, driving to Queens for this and Chelsea Piers for that. And, it was kind of a revelation to see, like, what does quality of life mean outside of New York City? It's a very different experience. So, I mean, that's what brought me to Philadelphia. Plus, Marta and I both worked at the Philadelphia Museum of Art together.
We did.
Our resumes actually have, in that Venn diagram, there's an overlap at the Philadelphia Museum of Art in the same years, which was, really a golden age at the Philadelphia Museum of Art when Anne Darnancourt was the director. I mean, and she was a legendarily inspiring museum director. And so, coming from Wharton, having had a background working in museums, I became involved at the Philadelphia Museum of Art actually as an intern from Wharton. And then I was actually looking at jobs, back here in New York, and was offered a job at the PMA because I was asking for references, and they were like, oh, no, we're not giving you a reference, but that's because we don't want you to go. And so I was very lucky. I mean, I was in the right place at the right time. There was a job that was just right for me, having a background in curatorial work, but having gone to a management program for, a business school for administration, and there was, really a good fit position for me at the PMA. And so, falling in love with Philadelphia and having a great job opportunity in the arts, and there are a lot of great
Perfect
opportunities
alchemy
in the arts. I'm in Philadelphia. That's how I ended up making Philadelphia my home.
Wonderful. And Marta, I mean, coming from San Antonio to Philadelphia, it's very different from just escaping the hustle and bustle of New York. What was it that drew you?
I just wanted to see the world, really. I just wanted to, Texas is very big, I mean, you can go anywhere. You could drive 6-8 hours and you're still in Texas. And I love Texas. I love the land, I love the people. But there was always something, maybe it was the trains. There was always something that wanted me to see another part of America. And after I graduated from UT, University of Texas in Austin, and I went to Tyler, I went to Rome first for the first year of grad school. And that was kind of the beginning of my wanting to see more and expand my ideas of community, of art, and how they interact. And so I graduated from Tyler, and I always thought that I would probably go somewhere else, but I just, life had me stay and get married and really become an active participant with the community of Philadelphia. There are certain pockets that embraced me as I embraced them. And it's been a wonderful 30, 40 years or so of living in Philadelphia and working in an art environment, whether it's institutions or universities or even private schools.
Wonderful. I'm glad you mentioned the community element, because something that's very true of both of you is now you are very much embedded in the bloodstream of the Philadelphia community. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about your kind of unique roles in that sense. So Bill leading the Woodmere Art Museum, which is, an organization that serves the community in a very inviting and direct way, and if you could speak a bit more about that.
Sure. So Woodmere is a museum dedicated to the artists of Philadelphia. And so built into the DNA of our mission is a community footprint. But it's that combined with something that I think is happening across the United States in museums, or I know is happening across the United States in museums, is that museums do have to engage people where they are now. It used to be that museums were kind of quiet places, more like a library than what we expect to encounter in a museum today, which is vibrant. We expect there to be music. We know there are lectures. We know there might be yoga in the galleries on Monday night. Do you know what I mean? That museums are places that have to create community and embrace people to engage with art. And so Woodmere does all of those things, combined with the fact that the artists that we work with and the collection that we have is local. And so you kind of bring those two things together, and there's a wonderful chemistry at Woodmere between, you know, the sort of the building, you know, the audience engagement and community outreach that I think is part of the culture of, you know, whether you're Woodmere, we're a small museum, whether you're the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which is, you know, creates a sense of community and you know, wants their members to feel a sense of ownership. So we work on that. But I think given that our mission is Philadelphia focused, you can come to Woodmere and you might meet an artist like Marta, you know, and do you know what I mean? And Marta, you know, teaches in the studio program at Woodmere. We have art classes, and you know, I think it's kind of special. You're not going to walk into the Philadelphia Museum of Art and meet Picasso, but you might walk into Woodmere and meet a wonderful artist. And it's those kinds of encounters that we're able to create at Woodmere that builds community.
Beautiful. Yeah. And Marta, I mean, your background is so unique as well, where yes, you have this institutional level of engagement. You're also an educator at the Philadelphia universities. And you also have this grassroots component with Cascarones, for example. And I was hoping you could talk about, you know, how you're involved in all these different organizations, how they might feed into each other, and how they might be, you know, distinct and interesting in their own right. Well,
one thing I have to say before we move off from Bill is that when I first got here in the 80s, when I arrived, there was still that kind of library presence at the PMA, and even at Woodmere, there was a little bit of a distinction of a lot of artists from Pennsylvania, but they were legendary. They were someone that you could not approach in the streets because you probably didn't see them in the streets. But once Bill became the director and was able to engage in the community of artists, active artists in Philadelphia, it brought even a more robust amount of energy into that area. Having artists curate shows, having, you know, different people with different visions as opposed to just one voice. And that's one thing that I commend about you and your work. Kudos, really, because you've left it open for anyone to be able to be the curator and the artist. You know?
Well, and Marta, you're one of those people. I mean, you teach at Woodmere, you're part of our education programs. I mean, you're one of the voices that, you know, I think, you know, you have something to say, and, you know, we want to engage people with that because I think, you know, in terms of community, I mean, I think the measure of success of any museum is the degree to which it brings creativity, the degree to which it opens the minds of the people in its community. And, you know, I think that's what artists do. And so embracing artists is kind of opening that, you know, that most precious thing that, you know, I think, you know, the world really needs now. I mean, you can't solve a problem without creativity. And so I think that art, I mean, in terms of like the role of art in community building, I mean, it's education and it's broadly, you know, the way creativity, you know, is the answer, not can be. So.
When I work in the studio, as many of my artist friends do, is we translate what the world is around us in a visual way. We're not the writer, we are the visual language of what we see and how we see it. And I think that experiencing that as an artist and then teaching young students or people at Woodmere that come in and may be retired and want to learn how to translate what is in front of them is such a precious gift, because you know, you get into that zone of creating. You appreciate the work because you realize how much time is taken to make each stroke. I just was blown away by watching these two young women come and to look at Barbara Bullock's painting. And I was going to ask Bill to stand right next to her to take a photo for Barbara. And this young woman was just doing these strokes. And those are the same strokes that I had talked about, the finesse in the feathering that Barbara has in one of those in her piece, you know? Right. And this is, it's a motion, it's a movement, it's an experience that you almost have to do that, you know, physically. But so I try to instill that in all my students so that they can feel that zen and can appreciate that idea, and so that it's not such a separation and a disconnect when they're looking at art. And as far as the Cascarones are concerned, I started working on this because I was at that time, 30 years ago, there was a really big pandemic with HIV and AIDS, and I had friends and family that were affected by that, and I wanted to assist and also have open a door of conversation as we make these little childlike eggs. And the eggs are filled with confetti. Cascarones are filled with confetti. And in springtime, kids go up to each other. It's really about the sneaking and cracking it over their head. That's the part of joy, And you can call it blessings. You can call it whatever you want of that surprise, that spontaneity in the action of doing something that gives you that surprise. But I did it because I wanted to add identity and the Mexican culture and lift it up into a positive. I was tired of having negative media, and I wanted to bring the sweetest, most innocent essence of that tradition to in a universal way. And maybe once they experience that, they would understand the humanity about it all. And that, symbolically, whether spring is about birth and whether the confetti is, to me, it's about just atoms. They feel like little atoms all busting through. So I wanted to combine all those things. And as I went through this program of sharing it with communities to decorate them, I heard a lot of people talking, almost like a quilting bee, where they're painting and they're talking, and then they're talking about their experiences with HIV and AIDS. Right. And when you sell them, the people that buy them experience it. And they didn't have anyone to talk to because of the kind of feeling, the isolation that they felt. And so I just think I gained a lot. And in a sense, I do paint and I do make these things, and they do connect. And then they do marry into the idea of maybe using imagery or folkloric kind of action to create community and to understand that these painted eggs were meant for philanthropy, for something good, and that art has action.
I love that. Art has action. I was going to save this question for the end, but now that you've mentioned Barbara's name and you've talked about some of these elements of joy and this connection with children and the innocence and expressing folkloric styles and symbolism, I feel we can't just gloss over her just yet. I'll circle back to the institutional questions. But I was hoping you could both speak on this, as you know Barbara Bullock very well. Who is Barbara Bullock, and why is it important for people to know her life and her work?
You spoke to her today, right?
I did, and I said, listen, Barbara, if your ears are burning, it's because we're talking about you. And she is such a beautiful soul, modest, quiet, but
strong as nails.
Strong as nails. Yeah. And she, she just, even when she talks to you, you feel an embrace, and I was talking to Diane Pieri about her. We were trying to collect the essence, of something that may have not been captured in other interviews or other, catalogs. But the idea of Barbara is that she went through so much in the 70s and 80s because she went to school. She did take art classes, in the Fleischer and different places, but she didn't get a degree. She didn't get her bachelor's degree like many institutions would expect you to receive a degree so that you could be valid as a painter or, a master's. She did it all on her own. And I can think of a lot of artists that are now coming out that have never gone through the institution of fine art department. So she was able to work with a group of artists in Germantown. And they were wonderful, strong artists, but mainly men. And so they had their themes, and they had certain, thoughts about it. And I'm sure they talked and they argued about what was important. And Barbara really had to find her imagery through her own voice, dealing with the idea that feminist art wasn't that popular. Women's art was kind of boxed in. Artists of color imagery was not really understood or accepted or valid in the fine art. It was kind of at a time when there was a lot more abstraction. Maybe even the figurative work was not as popular unless you're doing photorealism, Pearlstein kind of work.
Even the maximalism in her work, I think
Yeah.
of the vibrancy that was not very popular at the time,
So-
or what you've described in the
Yeah.
decorative
Pattern.
elements. Exactly.
Yeah, decorative. You know, it was just, there were all these things that were put in a place that you almost had to see it in a woman's gallery. You almost had to see it, you know, in a place that was honoring African American art for the month, as opposed to 24 hours a day, you know, and all the time. She went through a lot, and I'm just so taken by her strength in continuing and then building this language that she now has. And from the paper, I said, Barbara, from your works on paper, it's just grown and it's become 3D, and it's just lovely to see as it reaches out to the people, the audience. So I commend her, and I'm so honored to be here to be able to tell you that she's a dear friend of mine, and I learned a lot from her in her diligence.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the fact that, you know, there was this necessity to self-organize spaces and venues for exhibitions, especially through the 60s and 70s as a Black woman trying to break through the art world. But now we're entering a different era where the Woodmere Art Museum is working on an exhibition of hers. And so if you could talk about how you know Barbara and what it is that you're working on.
So I think I met Barbara at the PMA. And I mean, Marta, I think you did that so beautifully, and I would say I too feel deeply honored to count Barbara as a friend and to know that she counts me as a friend. It's something I'm proud of. Barbara is an artist who came to find her voice and be active in the arts in the 1960s. And in the exhibition that Claudia mentioned that we're organizing at Woodmere in the fall, opening September 24th, put it on your calendars, please. We're focusing on Barbara as an artist whose practice in the studio was always intertwined with her practice as a teacher. And so, you know, while so many of the artists around Barbara, you know, Marta, I think as you so beautifully said, we're getting their MFAs and we're getting advanced degrees at BAFA, you know, Barbara really built a career teaching, you know, art programs in the school district for K through 12 children. She worked in after-school programs. I think in Philadelphia, she may be the first artist to go into prisons and to do art in prisons and work with incarcerated individuals. She, would work with the Germantown Historical Society on a project. I mean, that Barbara, today there are, it is expected that artists will have a community engagement as part of their practice. Barbara was doing this in the 1960s. She was the director of the program of the Ile Ife Afro-American Cultural Center on Germantown Avenue, which was a cultural center founded by the dancer Arthur Hall, who in the early 1960s was a trained dancer who embraced Africa as the inspiration for his dance. And this was a groundbreaking thing happening in Philadelphia, and the Ile Ife Cultural Center became kind of a magnetic anchor for especially Black Philadelphia to engage, with this history that is there, that is carried through the generations of, the spirit of being of African descent. And Barbara was at the center of that, and it was huge in Philadelphia. And, in the pieces that are on view here by Barbara Bullock and the artist who was her very dear close friend, who was an artist who had a New York and Philadelphia career, Charles Searles, both of these images are of dancers. I mean, they're very different in terms of, flat patterning versus the incredible motion and energy and kind of almost sense of figures moving through space that you get in Barbara's piece as opposed to Charles's piece. But, this idea of dance and the idea of African art as a source of inspiration, I mean, that was something that was, happening in very fresh ways in Philadelphia and in other cities across the country, in Chicago and New York and other places in the 1960s. But in Philadelphia, Barbara was right at the center of that. And she brought that into schools. And, in that sense, I would say, and here's something that I think is so important and so interesting about Barbara, and this is something that I'm going to share ideas coming from my good friend Leslie King Hammond, who's a great art historian and scholar. And Leslie has done a lot of work on the Harlem Renaissance and the women artists of the Harlem Renaissance and how, it was women in particular who became artists and teachers and understood that, the power of art could be the way it inspires generations of young people and helps them grow into people that are fully rounded, creative, have the arts as an emotional anchor and as an outlet and as a place to explore and all of those things that art is. And from Leslie, I feel that I appreciate Barbara's place in art history, in the history of Black artists in Philadelphia, and in that sense, I feel like she's very unique. For our cities. So an important artist and, an artist of extraordinary virtuosity. I mean, you can stand in front of Barbara's works and just get lost in them. And, there's an incredible sense of color. I mean, Barbara can use every color in the rainbow, and yet, which is hard to do.
And it's cohesive still.
And it's a cohesive whole. And she can vary her touch. There are some parts of the painting that are very delicate. There are some parts of the paintings that are very bold and tough. And it's that's kind of the dancer in the painting. The rhythm.
Yeah.
I agree. So I love Barbara's art for what it gives me in terms of the emotions of the art. I mean, I will walk, if I see it in a gallery, I will walk over to it and stand in front of it. And it speaks to me. At the same time, I love that Barbara is an important person in the history of our city. Yes. And, one of the things that's really, that I'm very proud of is that Barbara has given Woodmere her education archives. So, we talk about Barbara having worked in schools, having worked in prisons. It wasn't as if she woke up in the morning and said, okay, I'm going to do this. She had lesson plans with outcomes. She, she had to make plans for what materials were required. She kept photographic documentation of projects as well as examples of her own demonstration pieces to show students, as well as examples of work that students would make and that they would give to her. And they're incredible stories. I mean, they're incredible lesson plans. Like there's one lesson that's about secrets. And like kids keep a lot of secrets. Mm-hmm. They have to. I mean, it's almost part of like growing up. And so she made boxes. She did a project with boxes that you could put your secrets into. And she said kids just like she was amazed at how much children had to put into this.
Whereas, well, it sounds like there's almost a therapeutic element there too. I think Barbara often talks about healing in her work, and
which is like spirituality of a certain side, which is functional, which is art that is function as opposed to art for art's sake. And when you talk about teaching, this was her breath. It is her breath. I'm sorry. This is her breath in the sense of teaching and giving and, well, you were talking about artists now, you know, they're artists and then they teach workshops. This was her job in the forefront. This is what sustained her. And as she was sustained, because she didn't have the salary that an artist at a university, which way back in the day, they would, you know, not only give you a great salary, but they would be able to give you a certain amount of money to be able to take care of your personal development, you know. And now that's not really the case because most of it is turning into adjuncts and it's, you know, you're not getting anything really, maybe a little bit, but she knew how to do it and she counted and a great business person for the sake of what she worked on diligently preparing, as meticulous as she prepared her plans, her projects with students. She carried it on to her studio and it lives, the children's work and her studio. She lives inside her palette.
Yes, yes, she does. Her studio is this incredible, like, vibrant yellow hue, and I mean, it so reflects the vibrancy of the work that she creates as well. Yeah, no, it's incredible. And I think, I mean, of course, her being an educator was in part an outcome of necessity.
Yes. Yes.
And I think one of the things to kind of bring this back to the institutional conversation is I appreciate all the steps that Woodmere is taking in diversifying collections and programs. And I mean, I look at this Charles Searles piece and I remember the Africans in the Americas exhibition and the musical component and just this kind of collective gathering around the arts, not just visual art specifically. So I understand the Woodmere has changed a lot in your tenure, and I'm curious if you can talk about the steps that the Woodmere has taken and is taking to commit to a more diverse cadre of artists in all of your programmatic offerings.
Yeah, well, 13 years ago, when I walked in the door as Woodmere's new director, it was a pretty white terrain of people that passed through the door. And this is in a city, Philadelphia, which is a majority non-white city. And so it just felt very off balance to me. And we developed policies that had to do with audience building. I mean, for me, and you know, this is how I think, you know, it's all about people, right? And so, you know, we were looking at how do we want to change this museum in terms of how do we want to change the people who engage with our mission. And you know, if the people who come into our museum don't look like our city, and we're a museum dedicated to the city's artists, then, you know, then we're not doing our job. And so it started with an audience building policy change or you know, goals that were formalized in a strategic plan and approved by the Board of Trustees. And then that trickles down to, you know, your education programming. It trickles down to your exhibition plan. It trickles down to your acquisitions, because you know, you build your exhibitions through your I mean, most museums, you know, you have a collection, and you know, you think of the exhibitions that you organize as an opportunity to interpret, to share with others, you know, the collection that it's your job to take care of and steward for future generations. And so, you know, we started actively collecting the work of African American artists, and we started piecing together a story, a history that we didn't know, and that P.S. I don't think anybody in Philadelphia really knew. And the exhibition that you referenced before, We Speak, was a show we did, I want to say in 2015 or 16, something like that. And it was a show that grew out of a series of oral histories, maybe, I'm not going to exaggerate it, it was, you know, 80 to 100 oral histories with individuals who were artists. Barbara was one of them. People who worked in galleries, Sandy Webster. People, you know, people who worked in museums, people who were, you know, organizers at the YMCA, which was an important venue for, you know, the African American community in Philadelphia. People who were part of the Pyramid Club, which was a social club for the well-to-do black community of Philadelphia, because black people couldn't belong to other clubs or couldn't go to restaurants. And so, there was a gallery at the Pyramid Club where Doc's Thrash worked. And so we started learning these stories, like that Doc's Thrash was an important part of the Pyramid Club. I mean, just for example. And it was through these oral histories that particular exhibition came into form, because we asked these 80 or 100 people, like, if you were telling the story of the history of African American art in Philadelphia from the 1920s to the 1970s, that was the bracket that we established. And this was working with Susanna Gold, who's a wonderful curator and friend of yours and friend of ours. And Susanna was guest curator there. And Susanna did most of these oral histories. And so we organized that exhibition, but we're continuing to build on that. So, that's a long-winded way to say that a lot of research goes into it. Yes. And that, from the museum's point of view, it needs to be an authentic quest for the history and sort of bringing that history up that hasn't been told before. And so, I think that there's a lot of posturing, but I think that communities know when the intent is real.
The authenticity certainly comes through. And I think of the important scholastic document that produces too, and that also then brings in the role of the educator in connecting audiences with these more diverse perspectives. And I was hoping you could touch on that a little bit, because you've been an educator in museums as well as schools and at the community level.
I really enjoy teaching. As I said, I've taught first graders, I've taught third, high school maybe on as far as like art centers at Taller Puertorriqueño. Mm-hmm. I just love kids. Yeah. And I even like big kids, like when they're 21, 22, 23. Yeah. They're so fabulous. They really are. Mm-hmm. And I see myself as ageless. I mean, unless I look in the mirror.
As it should be.
I'm like 8
I'm with
all
you there.
the time. And so when I teach at college, I have, unfortunately, in the fine arts departments now, it's not the studios that I remember when I went to a fine art school, where they were all fine art students. Now we have people that are in science, marketing, all kinds of different majors are coming to take this class. Mm-hmm. And I've got to make sure that they get it, and I want to. Right. And I want them to feel like they're dancing when they're painting or drawing, Yes. Not, I want them to really experience these things. So I find, first of all, if I'm there and they see this Chicana talking, that little short person that's talking and really getting excited, mm-hmm. I mean, whatever they ever thought of me, because I don't see that. I just see everything, universally as far as love, as far as I'm concerned. I don't make any judgment on that. But in the event, if they did, they walk away with knowledge of who I am. And any of misconceptions of identity can be kind of opened up to many different aspects. My work, as far as teaching, I make sure that it's very diverse when I show artwork. I show videos, a lot of artist videos, contemporary ones that talk about their story, so they really get deep into that feeling, that it's not about legends. I don't even want to masters, but people that are more contemporary and more connected to them, mm-hmm. so that they have a real diverse way of thinking. What is fine art? Does it all have to be photorealism? Does it have to be abstract? Can it be this figurative? Can it be a loose figurative work? Can it have rhythm? Can it have color? Can it have something that I feel? And if I can get them to get that little bit of experience, and if they go marketing or they become a business person, if they study law, I want them to walk away knowing that was the experience that they can share in society, and that they can support that.
Beautiful.
You know, so I want everyone to be able to feel that, and so when they go to the art museums, they can stop and look a little bit deeper and see the mechanics of it and see the joy, and laugh or feel a certain pang of emotion. Because I think sometimes people in the past used to think that looking at art was as difficult as translating poetry. And I don't think poetry is hard either, you know? But
Right.
I would get these kind of feedback. And now that I have the chance of teaching people that are from all walks of life, I have a stronger audience to make that change. And so I use artura.org, you know,
Great.
I use that. But I also use videos, and I use different, I take them to the museum, I take them to Woodmere, and they look, and they have to write an essay. Really just a page, because I just want to make sure that they did something.
They pay attention.
They pay attention, and then they go, yeah, this is nice, you know.
So I do want to end on one last question, because I'm getting the sign that time flies when we're having fun, right? So it's fair to. Oh, I guess yes. Are there any questions in the audience before I hop into mine?
I don't have any questions. I'm just agreeing with what they're saying, because I'm here also part of the community and an artist, and it's so important to have that. And it's such a difference when you have people from different ethnicities coming in and being able to relate to the art and experience like, oh, I'm part of all this. And really, if you look at the history of art, that's what everybody did, really. They were discussing their language of their people and their community. But seeing it at this point, it doesn't feel that way. But I think that's what's very important, and it's just wonderful. I'm just like, oh, I'm glowing.
Come
here.
to Philly.
I love Philly. And you're saying why you moved to Philly. To me, it was like, if I had to leave New York, that's where I would go, because it's like a little capsule of New York, but better because it's more homegrown, right? You're more family.
Well, here's something that we were talking about a little earlier, just to bring this full circle, is what is it that you think prevents Philadelphia from being viewed, I should say, as a major cultural capital in the same way that other major cities might be? I think we're all ambassadors for the Philly art scene. And
Well, so I think that the history of art, the history of American art, is the history of American art in New York. I mean, it used to be there was the canon, right? And we've done a lot of work in museums and art history departments in colleges, art historians, to kind of break that down and to say, hey, there's this story we learned at the Museum of Modern Art, but you know what? There's a story in Chicago that's pretty interesting too. There's a story in Philadelphia that's pretty interesting too. And so I think that, for many decades, New York was the definition and everything was measured against that. And I think that that's changed quite a bit, as New York has changed. Philly has a grassroots, vibrant art scene that New York no longer has, because young artists can't afford to just come to New York and live. It used to be that artists would graduate from art school and get on the next bus to New York, and they don't do that anymore. They're staying in Philadelphia. Every time I turn around, there's another artist collective gallery. There's another, artists figuring out how to do it. You can live affordably in Philadelphia. And a lot of people are moving. I live in West Philly in a neighborhood that's very Brooklyn-like, and I grew up in Brooklyn. A lot of my neighbors are people who, have kids. They got priced out of Brooklyn when they started looking at, okay, our kids are getting older and we need a little bit of, and are coming to Philly because it's a livable place. I would also add to that, Philadelphia is a Quaker city. It's modest. The city of brotherly love thing is real. There's a Quaker culture in Philadelphia that, we don't have that kind of toot your horn with the biggest trombone you can find. We do not do that in Philadelphia. It's an understated kind of a cultural city. You know, New York is a city of commerce, right?
And competition.
And competition that, you know, New York creates itself and then destroys itself and recreates itself, and it's, you know, it's the energy of New York is that. And there are thousands of galleries, hundreds of thousands of galleries in New York. In Philadelphia, how many art galleries are in Philadelphia? Commercial art galleries.
Oh, it's gotten small.
You could count them on you know, on my fingers. And so I think that artists in Philadelphia historically didn't have the representation of the kinds of galleries that do the marketing that makes artists, you know, famous more broadly. And so, I mean, I think that's been, you know, that's been difficult for artists in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is a college town, so I mean, I think there are a lot of opportunities for artists to teach, but not a lot of opportunities for artists to sell their work through galleries.
Exactly. Marta, do you have anything to add to that?
I can keep getting lost in all the wonderful.
I know there are a lot of
things
nuggets
that-
here
a lot
that
of
we could
great
keep pulling
things.
at, but
You know, I think that there has been, you know, we all have changed after the pandemic, and everyone closed down and everyone started new. That's one of the things I felt. We were all the same. You know, institutions, museums all closed down, galleries closed down, some of them remain, some of them are not. And there's a chance for anyone at this time to thrive if the doors will remain open for opportunity. And as I said, I really thank Bill for opening the doors to us. The Philadelphia Museum of Art does have some work, you know, but the difference is Bill will list me as a Chicana in his collection, where, you know, I'm still American at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And, you know, I mean, and the thing is, you know, for me, I mean, we all have our thing. We all have, as far as artists of color, you know, we want to be recognized. I want my mom to know that all her suffering, I want my father to know, well, in heaven, that, you know, from all this suffering, my aunts, my nephews, my young children, that the movement that I'm a part of, that describes the human experience as a Mexican or a Chicana, is valid. And so we have a little, you know, a ways to go, but it's not anything that I'm going to give up on. And one of the last things I wanted to say is, as far as Barbara and myself and other people, is that artists of color not only had to work in various ways to sustain themselves, you know, being great tradespeople, learning to you know, find jobs that would suit the purpose so that they could live and make art, because they weren't in a university. But they also had to archive their work. They had to document their work because no one else was going to. And for that, I thank you for starting archives at the Woodmere, because at this time there aren't any institutions that will do that in a way that's not, you know, that's more open and universal. And Mount Airy, Philadelphia, it's been known for the diversity of not only having mixed couples, you know, African American, Hispanic, all these different people, you know. It's been in social science books.
Yeah. West Philly too. I mean,
Philly,
you know,
yeah.
Philadelphia is special in that way.
So on that note, I would love to.
Can I say one more thing about Marta?
Yes, you can.
I just have to, because one of the exciting things happening in Philadelphia right now is the original building of the Barnes Foundation is now
I'm glad you're saying this.
the Museum of St. Joseph's University, the Francis M. McGuire Art Museum of St. Joe's. And in that first gallery, that kind of sacred gallery where the big Cézanne card players were and the Seurat poseuses, hangs an amazing painting by Marta.
I'm so happy.
And, you know, and which is to say that you're a role model, not only in your teaching, but in your art, that you can walk into this, you know, this greatest of American museum buildings, and, you know, there's a painting by Marta hanging where a Degas used to hang.
Really?
That was the Degas horse races, I think, the spot that you have in that first big entry gallery of the Barnes. And it's very special. And just to totally wrap it up, I mean, the collection there is a historical collection mostly of Latin American religious art. And it's been beautiful to see what St. Joe's, and Marta's a faculty member there, is bringing in contemporary, Latinx artists from all across the diaspora, engaging in the present with that past that's represented in the collection. It's a beautiful thing to see, and I think it's a great example for young people, all across Philadelphia and New York and everywhere else to please come see. So, I mean, Marta, you should be very proud because, you really are playing a starring role in this very exciting thing that's just happened in Philadelphia.
Well, this just perfectly captures the Philadelphia spirit. It's loving, it's encouraging, and I thank you both for shining a light on that environment.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
So thank you all for coming. There are more programs coming up tomorrow, and then next Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, which is our closing date. So please stop by again. Thanks so much again to our wonderful panel.